Princess Valith Sorenthar stood alone on the observation deck of Nexus Station and watched her father's flagship disappear into the darkness of space. She was 19 cycles old, and this was supposed to be a simple mission. Her father, the Emperor, had sent her to negotiate a minor trade agreement with the Confederacy, and everyone in the royal court knew this task was beneath her station. It was punishment. 3 weeks ago, she had publicly questioned her father's military expansion during a council meeting, and the Emperor did not appreciate being challenged by his own daughter. So here she was alone on a station at the edge of civilized space with nothing but a small diplomatic team and 3 elite shadow guards for protection. The shadow guards were the finest warriors in the Ethering Empire, and each one had trained for decades in combat and assassination techniques. Valid had felt safe with them by her side. That safety lasted exactly 6 hours. She found the first guard collapsed in the corridor outside her quarters, with foam dripping from his mouth, and his eyes rolled back into his skull. The second guard was discovered in the dining area, slumped over a table with a half-eaten meal in front of him. The third guard never made it back from his patrol, and station security found his body stuffed into a maintenance shaft. Poisoned. Someone had poisoned all 3 of her protectors with something that worked fast and left no trace. Valith stood in her quarters and tried to control her breathing as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She could not contact her father, because doing so would reveal her vulnerability to every spy and assassin in the sector. She could not trust station security because any one of them could be working for whoever had killed her guards. She could not simply hide in her room for 3 days, because eventually they would come for her directly. She needed protection, as she needed it now. The Mercenary Guild Hall on Nexus Station was exactly as unpleasant as Valith had expected. The air smelled of alcohol and sweat and something chemical that made her eyes water. Dozens of aliens filled the space, and each one looked more dangerous than the last. Massive Corthans with cybernetic arms sat at tables and cleaned weapons that could punch through starship hulls. Valkyrie assassins in their distinctive black armor watched her from the shadows, with their 4 eyes tracking her every movement. Syndicate killers, covered in bioenhancements, whispered to each other and pointed in her direction. Valith kept her hood up and tried to look confident as she approached the Guildmaster's desk. The Guildmaster was a fat creature with 6 arms and a face that looked like melted wax, and he smiled at her in a way that made her skin crawl after paying his finder's fee. Valith discovered she had barely enough credits left to hire anyone competent. The Guildmaster gestured toward the main hall and told her to find someone in her price range. Valith looked around the room and felt despair settling into her chest. Every mercenary she could afford looked either incompetent or untrustworthy, or both. Then she noticed him, a human. He sat alone at a corner table with a steaming cup of something brown in his hands, and he was not looking at her like the others were. He was simply sitting there and drinking his beverage and staring at nothing in particular. Humans were a minor species in the galactic community, and Valith knew the basic facts about them. They came from a death world called Earth, where the environment was harsh and the wildlife was deadly. They were adaptable and clever and made decent engineers and traders. But individually, they were unremarkable. Average height compared to most sentient species, and weaker than Corthans, and slower than Valkyrie, and less durable than almost everyone else. Not exactly warrior material, but he was all she could afford, and the other mercenaries were starting to move toward her with hungry expressions on their faces. Valith walked to the human's table and stood before him and waited for him to acknowledge her presence. He looked up slowly, and she saw that his eyes were tired. Not sleepy, tired, but the kind of tired that came from carrying something heavy for a very long time. He had short, dark hair with streaks of gray at the temples and a face that was neither handsome nor ugly, just ordinary, completely and utterly ordinary. "Can you guard me, human?" The words came out more desperate than she intended, but she was past caring about dignity. The human studied her for a moment and took another sip from his cup. For how long? 3 days until my transport arrives, he considered. This and something flickered behind those tired eyes, something she could not identify. Then he nodded and set down his cup and stood from the table. I am Marcus Cole, and sure I could use the work. Valith felt relief wash over her, even though she knew she had probably just hired the least impressive bodyguard in the entire station. Marcus Cole asked about payment, and she told him what she could offer, and he accepted without negotiation. He asked about her schedule, and she explained the remaining diplomatic meetings she needed to attend. He asked about threats, and she told him about her poisoned guards, and he simply nodded as if this information was neither surprising nor concerning. They left the guild hall together, and Valeth noticed that the other mercenaries watched them go. Some of them were laughing up. Corthan made a comment about the princess hiring a pet instead of a protector, and his companions roared with amusement. Marcus Cole did not react to the insult and simply walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, like a man taking a casual stroll. Valeth wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She did not know that the name Marcus Cole was whispered in fear throughout human space. She did not know about the siege of Helion 4, where one man had held a corridor against 200 enemy soldiers for 11 hours straight. She did not know about the blackout protocols or the missions that had been erased from every official record. She did not know that Earth's military had officially listed this man as deceased 3 years ago, because it was easier than explaining what he really was. She did not know any of these things. All she knew was that she had hired the cheapest bodyguard in the room, and she was probably going to die as they walked toward her quarters. Marcus Cole glanced at her, and for just a moment she thought she saw something in his expression, something that looked almost like amusement. "Do not worry, Your Highness." His voice was calm and quiet, and completely unremarkable. "You will survive these 3 days." Valith wanted to believe him, but she had no reason to trust the words of an ordinary human. She had no idea how wrong she was about that word, ordinary. Marcus Cole was many things, but ordinary was not one of them, and in the days to come the entire galaxy would learn exactly what a human was capable of when given something worth protecting. The first day passed without incident, and Valith found herself growing increasingly frustrated with her new bodyguard. Marcus Cole was boring. There was simply no other word for Ide. Did not boast about his skills or tell stories of past battles or try to impress her with displays of strength. He simply followed her from meeting to meeting and stood quietly in corners and watched everything with those tired eyes. When she attended her diplomatic sessions, he waited outside the door and checked his communicator and sometimes yawned. When she ate her meals, he sat across from her and ordered something called coffee and drank it slowly without making conversation. When she asked him questions about his background, he gave short answers that revealed nothing. "Where are you from Earth originally, then various places? How long have you been a mercenary? Few years. Have you done this kind of work before?" Valith wanted to scream at him. Shadow Guards had been elite warriors who radiated confidence and power and made her feel protected just by standing near them. Marcus Cole radiated nothing. It was like a piece of furniture that happened to follow her around. She began to notice other things that concerned her. He carried no visible weapons, no blaster on his hip or blade on his back or any of the usual equipment that mercenaries displayed proudly. His clothes were simple civilian garments that offered no protection against energy weapons or physical attacks. He moved with no particular grace or speed and seemed content to walk at whatever pace she set. By evening, Valith was convinced she had wasted her credits on a fraud. She retired to her quarters and locked the door and activated the security alarm and told herself that she would survive the night through luck alone because her bodyguard was clearly useless. Sleep came slowly as she lay in her bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the station, hum of the environmental systems and the distant clang of machinery and the occasional footsteps of people passing in the corridor outside. She finally drifted off sometime after midnight, and Then she woke to silence. Complete and total silence. That was wrong. Her door alarm should have chimed when she entered the sleep cycle, and it should be softly humming in standby mode. Instead, there was nothing. Velith reached under her pillow and pulled out the ceremonial blade she had hidden there. It was not much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. She slid out of bed and crept toward the main room of her quarters, with the blade held ready in her trembling hand. The door to the main room was slightly open, and dim light spilled through the crack. She pressed herself against the wall and took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Marcus Cole stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 4 bodies. He was not breathing hard. He was not sweating or shaking or showing any sign of exertion. He simply stood there like a man who had finished a mildly inconvenient. Cara Velith stared at the bodies and felt her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. One of the intruders was embedded in the wall. Actually, embedded, with his upper body punched through the metal panels and his legs dangling limply on this side. Another lay on the floor with his neck bent at an angle that should not be possible and his eyes staring at nothing. The third and fourth were crumpled together near the door, and Velith looked away quickly because whatever had happened to them was not something she wanted to examine closely. They bypassed your alarm. Marcus spoke casually, as if discussing the weather or commenting on the quality of the station. Food you might want to get that fixed. Velith opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She watched as Marcus knelt beside one of the bodies and pulled out a knife. A knife she had never seen him carry. He wiped the blade clean on the dead man's clothing and slid it somewhere into his civilian jacket, and she still could not see where it went. How did you know they were coming? She finally managed to force the question past her lips. Heard them in the corridor. Marcus stood and stretched his shoulders like someone working out a minor stiffness. Human hearing is not great compared to most species, but I have learned to compensate. You killed 4 people, yes, in the time it took me to walk from my bedroom to this door. Marcus looked at her and something shifted in his expression, something that made her feel very small and very young. They were syndicate extractors, Your Highness, professional kidnappers who specialize in high-value targets. If I had let them reach you, then you would be on a ship right now, heading toward a black market auction where you would be sold to the highest bidder. Velith swallowed hard and tightened her grip on her ceremonial blade. Why you? This question came out as a whisper. Marcus Cole smiled, and for just a moment, she saw something behind those tired eyes. Something old and cold and infinitely patient. Something that made her want to step backward. Even though she was a princess raised among warriors, I am your guard, ma'am. His voice was soft and almost gentle. That is all you need to know. He turned away and began examining the door controls, and Velith noticed that his movements had changed. Earlier, he had seemed slow and unremarkable. Now she could see the economy in every gesture. No wasted motion and no unnecessary effort. Like a predator conserving energy between kills. You should get some sleep, Your Highness. He did not look at her as he spoke. Tomorrow might be busy. Velith retreated to her bedroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of her bed with her blade still clutched in her hands. She did not sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, she sat there and replayed the scene in her mind and tried to understand what she had witnessed. 4 professional killers, elite syndicate operatives who had successfully bypassed her security systems, dead in seconds, and Marcus Cole had not even broken a sweat. She thought about the way the other mercenaries had laughed at him in the guild hall. She thought about how ordinary he had seemed. She thought about the tired look in his eyes that she now realized was not exhaustion at all. It was restraint, the look of someone who was constantly holding something back, something dangerous. Velith had grown up surrounded by warriors and soldiers, and she had learned to recognize strength in all its forms. But this was different. This was something she had never encountered before. When the morning came, Marcus was waiting for her in the main room with 2 cups of coffee, and the bodies were gone. Velith did not ask what he had done with them. She simply sat down across from him and accepted the cup he offered and tried to keep her hands from shaking. "You have questions, Your Highness." Marcus took a sip of his coffee and watched her with those tired, patient eyes. Valith had 1,000 questions, but she asked only one: "Can you protect me from whatever comes next?" Marcus set down his cup and met her gaze directly. Yes. The word was simple and quiet and absolutely certain. For the first time since arriving on this station, Valith believed she might actually survive. She had hired a human because he was cheap. She was beginning to understand that cheap did not mean weak. It just meant that no one else knew what she was starting to learn, that there was something terrifying hiding behind that ordinary face. Something the galaxy had never seen before. Word traveled fast on Nexus Station. By midday, everyone knew that 4 Syndicate extractors had been killed in the princess's quarters. The rumors varied wildly. Some said she had a hidden security team. Others claimed she possessed secret Etherin weapons. A few whispered that something else had happened, something that did not make sense because the bodies had been found and examined before. Station security disposed of them, and the injuries did not match any known weapon. They matched bare hands. Valith heard the whispers as she walked through the market district with Marcus at her side. People were looking at her differently now, not with predatory hunger, but with cautious curiosity. They were trying to figure out what had changed. She was trying to figure out the same thing. Marcus walked beside her in his simple civilian clothes with his hands in his pockets and that same tired expression on his face. He looked exactly as unremarkable as he had the day before, but now she knew better. Now she watched him from the corner of her eye and noticed things she had missed before. The way his gaze moved constantly across the crowd and tracked every potential threat. The way he positioned himself between her and any shadowed doorway or concealed alcove. The way his body never fully relaxed, even when he appeared completely at ease. He was always ready, always watching, always calculating. She was so focused on observing him that she almost missed the massive figure stepping into their path. The Kortham was 7 feet tall and built like a siege engine. Half his body was cybernetic, with gleaming metal plates covering his arms and chest, and one eye replaced by a glowing red sensor. His name was Drethker, and Valith recognized him immediately. He was a warlord who controlled 3 systems in the outer territories, and he had a reputation for brutality that made even other Korthan's uncomfortable. Drethker smiled down at her with teeth that had been filed to points. "Princess." His voice was like grinding metal, and she could smell something rotten on his breath. "I hear you have been having trouble with uninvited guests." Valith straightened her spine and tried to project confidence. "I have no trouble that I cannot handle." The Korthan laughed, and the sound echoed through the market and made nearby shoppers scatter. "I am sure you believe that, little flower, but I think we should discuss your protection arrangement." He glanced at Marcus with obvious contempt. "Perhaps you would prefer someone more impressive to guard you." Marcus did not react to the insult. He simply stood there with his hands in his pockets and looked up at the massive alien with no expression on his face. "I am content with my current arrangement." Valith kept her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. "Please step aside." Drethker did not move. Instead, he reached out with one cybernetic hand and grabbed Marcus by the shoulder. "Little human." The Korthan squeezed, and Valith heard servos whining as the mechanical fingers tightened. "Do you know what I am? I have crushed 100 of your kind beneath my feet." Marcus looked at the hand on his shoulder and then up at the Korthan's face. Probably his voice was calm and almost bored. "But you have never fought one of my kind." Then he moved. Valith had seen fast before. She had watched Aetherine shadow guards train, and they could move faster than most eyes could track. Marcus Cole moved faster. 3 strikes. Just 3. His hands blurred through the air and connected with specific points on the Korthan's body. Points that should not matter on a species known for their incredible durability. Drethker collapsed. He fell to his knees first and then toppled forward onto his face and lay there twitching. His eyes were open and his mouth was moving, but no sound came out. He was conscious but completely paralyzed. Marcus knelt beside the fallen warlord and spoke softly. I have studied every species in this sector, anatomy and psychology, and breaking points. Your people fear silence because your ancestors were hunted by ambush predators on your homeworld. Right now you cannot move, and you cannot speak, and you cannot even scream, just like being hunted. He paused and let the words sink in. Tell your friends the princess is protected. Tell them the human is not normal. And if anyone else comes for her, Marcus leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper that Valeth could barely hear. I will be creative. He stood and brushed off his hands and turned back to Valeth. We should continue shopping, Your Highness. He said it as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just disabled one of the most feared warlords in the sector with his bare hands. In less than 2 seconds, Valeth followed him in stunned silence. The market crowd parted before them, and she saw fear in eyes that had looked at her with contempt just yesterday. They found a quiet corner in a small cafe, and Marcus ordered his coffee and sat across from her with that same tired expression. Valeth could not contain her questions any longer. Tell me what you are. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he began to speak. He told her about Earth, about a world where the gravity was crushing, and the atmosphere was corrosive, and the water could drown you, and the sun could burn you. About wildlife that had evolved specifically to kill, and environments that changed without warning. About diseases that mutated faster than medicine could adapt, and plants that produced toxins, and weather that could destroy cities. We evolved there. His voice was quiet and matter-of-fact. Every generation that survived made the next generation a little tougher and a little more adaptable. We developed persistence hunting because we could not outrun our prey, so instead we followed them until they collapsed from exhaustion. Our bodies can heal from injuries that would kill most species. Our brains develop pattern recognition that borders on precognition. And then we invented war. He paused and took a sip of his coffee. Real war is not about individual strength or speed or durability. It is about using every advantage. Evolution gave us endurance and adaptability, and tool use, and most importantly, the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. But you are just one human. Valeth protested weakly. Marcus smiled, and there was no warmth in it. I am not just anything, Your Highness. I am what happens when Earth decides it needs someone who can operate alone behind enemy lines for years at a time. Someone who can adapt to any species and any environment and any threat. He set down his cup. They called us revenants. Most of us are dead now, the ones who survived. We do not go home. Why not? Because we cannot turn it off. He met her eyes, and she saw something ancient and terrible lurking behind that tired gaze. We became weapons. Your Highness, and weapons do not get to retire. They get used until they break. Valeth sat in silence and processed everything she had heard. She had hired a human because they were considered weak and harmless. She had hired something far more dangerous than any Corthan warlord or syndicate assassin. She had hired a living weapon, and for the next 2 days, the weapon belonged to her. Tomorrow is your final day here. Your Highness. Marcus stood and dropped credits on the table. I suggest you stay in your quarters as much as possible. Why? Because word is spreading about what happened today. He glanced toward the market where Drethger was only now being helped to his feet by his terrified subordinates. And some people are going to want to test whether the rumors are true. Let them come. Valeth surprised herself. With the confidence in her voice, I have you. Marcus looked at her, and for just a moment the tiredness faded from his eyes. Yes, Your Highness, you do. There was something like warmth in his voice, something almost human, and whatever comes next, I will be ready. Day 3 began with hope. Valeth woke knowing that her transport would arrive in just 12 hours, and then she would be safe. She would return home to the Empire, and this nightmare would become nothing more than a strange memory. Marcus was already awake when she emerged from her bedroom. He stood by the window and stared out at the stars with a cup of coffee in his hand and that familiar, tired expression on his face. "Your transport is on schedule. Your Highness," he did not turn to look at her. "12 hours and you will be free of this place." Vath felt something unexpected at those words, something almost like disappointment. She had grown accustomed to his presence over the past 2 days. His quiet competence and his calm confidence had become a strange sort of comfort. "Thank you, Marcus." She meant it sincerely for everything. He turned then, and she saw something flicker across his face, something that might have been warmth before it disappeared behind the mask of professional detachment. "Just doing my job, Your Highness." The morning passed slowly. Velith attended her final diplomatic meeting and signed the trade agreements and smiled for the official photographs. Marcus stood in the corner and watched everything with those patient eyes. By midday, she was finished with her official duties, and there was nothing left to do but wait. They returned to her quarters, and Velith allowed herself to relax for the first time in days. 6 more hours. Then the lights went out. Every light on the station died at once and plunged them into complete darkness. Velith gasped and reached for Marcus, but he was already moving. His hand found her shoulder and guided her toward the wall. "Stay here." His voice was calm and controlled. "Do not move until I tell you. Emergency." Lighting flickered on and bathed everything in a dim red glow. Then the communication system crackled to life, and a voice filled the air. Cold mechanical voice that sent chills down her spine. "Attention, Nexus Station. This is Commander Vex of the Crimson Veil. We have taken control of this facility. Our ships have docked at all major ports, and our soldiers control all primary corridors. We are here for Princess Velith Sontha. Send her to us within 1 hour, or we will begin decompressing civilian sections. Every 10 minutes that passes without her surrender will cost 1,000 lives. Choose wisely." The communication ended and silence filled the room. Velith felt her blood turn to ice. The Crimson Veil. She knew that name. Every royal in the galaxy knew that name. They were a coalition of pirates and slavers and political extremists who specialized in targeting noble families. They had kidnapped and murdered dozens of high-ranking officials over the years, and now they were here for how many? Her voice came out as a whisper. Marcus was checking something on his communicator, and his expression had changed. Tiredness was gone. In its place was something focused and sharp, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. 3 warships docked outside. He spoke without looking up. Approximately 300 soldiers already on the station based on their standard deployment patterns, plus ship crews. Velith felt despair crushing her chest. That was an army. No one could fight an army. Marcus, she grabbed his arm. "You have to leave. Find somewhere to hide. There is no point in both of us dying." Looked at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. He was not afraid, was not even concerned. If anything, he looked almost relieved, like a man who had been waiting for something and it had finally arrived. "Your Highness." His voice was soft, but carried an edge of steel beneath it. "Do you remember what I told you about humans? We do not fight fair. We fight to win." He reached into his jacket and began pulling out weapons, a pistol that she had never seen before, 2 knives with blades that seemed to drink the red emergency light, something small and cylindrical that looked homemade and deeply unpleasant, several items she could not identify, but that made her instincts scream danger. "How did you hide all of that?" The question came out before she could stop it. Marcus smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "I did not hide them, Your Highness. No one bothered to look." He finished his inventory and moved toward the door. "There is a panic room behind your bedroom closet. The access code is 7739. Get inside and lock it down. Do not open it for anyone except me." He paused with his hand on the door. "You will know it is me because I will knock twice and then 3 times. Anyone else who tries to enter, kill them." "What are you going to do?" Marcus looked back at her, and his eyes were completely empty. No warmth and no tiredness and no Humanity just cold calculating purpose my job then. He was gone. What followed would become legend throughout the galaxy. The Crimson Veil had conquered space stations before they had overwhelmed military installations and orbital platforms and fortified positions. They had never encountered anything. Like Marcus Cole, he did not fight them. He hunted them. The station became his weapon. He moved through maintenance shafts and service corridors that the invaders did not even know existed. He turned off gravity in one section and watched his soldiers floated helplessly before he picked them off one by one. He vented another section to vacuum and listened through the walls as men screamed and died in the cold embrace of space. He rerouted coolant lines to freeze a third section solid and left the bodies as warnings for anyone who came after. When direct combat was unavoidable, he was brutal and efficient. Appeared from shadows and struck before anyone could react. He used every dirty trick that humanity had developed in its long bloody history. Feints and traps and psychological warfare. Left some soldiers alive, deliberately left them wounded and terrified so they could spread fear to the others. Within 2 hours, the Crimson Veil was in chaos. Their communications were scrambled. Their command structure was shattered. Their soldiers were refusing to enter certain sections of the station. Rumors spread through their ranks. There was something on this station, something that could not be stopped, something that killed without mercy and vanished without trace. Commander Vex sent squad after squad to find and eliminate the threat. None of them returned by hour 4. The invaders had lost over 100 soldiers, and they had not even seen their enemy clearly. By hour 6, the Crimson Veil was in full retreat. Soldiers abandoned their posts and fled toward the docking bay. Ships began undocking without authorization, as crews decided that no prize was worth this nightmare. By hour 8, the last Crimson Veil warship fled into hyperspace and left behind a station littered with their dead. Commander Vex was found alive in his command center. He was physically unharmed, but his mind was broken. He sat in the corner and rocked back and forth and whispered the same words over and over. The devil from Earth. The devil from Earth. No one ever learned exactly what Marcus had done to him. No one wanted to know it. Her panic room. Valeth heard 2 knocks, then 3. She opened the door and found Marcus standing there covered in blood. None of it was his. Transport is here, Your Highness. His voice was calm and professional, as if he had just completed a routine task. We should. Gavalith looked at him and saw the blood on his hands and the emptiness in his eyes, and she understood something fundamental about humanity that day. They were not weak, they were restrained. When that restraint was removed, there was nothing in the galaxy that could stop them, nothing at all. The Aetherin rescue fleet arrived 3 hours after the Crimson Veil fled. They found a station in chaos with emergency crews working to restore systems and bodies being cataloged in the cargo bays. They found Commander Vex still rocking in his wasp corner and muttering about devils. They found Princess Valeth Saranther alive and unharmed, standing in the docking bay with a human at her side. Emperor Saranther himself had come to retrieve his daughter. He was a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and eyes that could freeze blood. He descended from his shuttle surrounded by a dozen shadow guards and crossed the docking bay with long, purposeful strides. Valith, his voice echoed through the space. Are you injured? I am fine, father. She stepped forward and embraced him briefly. Thanks to my protector. The Emperor looked at Marcus for the first time. He saw an ordinary human in simple civilian clothes with tired eyes and blood staining his hands and jacket. His shadow guards moved closer, with their hands on their weapons. This is the one. The Emperor's voice carried a weight of skepticism. This human killed over 100 Crimson Veil soldiers and defeated an invasion force single-handedly. Marcus said nothing. He simply stood there and met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. The shadow guards shifted uncomfortably because they recognized something in that stillness. Something dangerous. Emperor Saranthar was not a fool. He had ruled an empire for 40 years, and he had learned to recognize power in all its forms. He saw it now in this unremarkable human who should have been dead 100 times over. "What is your name, human Marcus Cole?" "Your Majesty," the Emperor nodded slowly. "Tell me what you want." "Marcus Cole, name, your price, wealth and titles, and a commission in my fleet. All of this I offer freely for saving my daughter's life." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I just want passage to somewhere quiet." His voice was soft and carried an edge of exhaustion. "Somewhere I can forget what I am good at." The Emperor frowned, because this was not the answer he expected. No one refused an Emperor's gratitude. No one walked away from the kind of rewards he was offering. Valith stepped forward before her father could respond. "Father, may I speak with my protector privately before he leaves?" The Emperor considered this and then nodded. 5 minutes. He turned and walked back toward his shuttle, with his guards falling in around him. Valith led Marcus to a quiet corner of the docking bay where they could not be overheard. "I need to understand." She faced him directly. "All that strength and all that skill, why hide it? Why pretend to be ordinary when you could be wealthy and powerful and celebrated?" Marcus looked out at the stars beyond the docking bay windows. "Because strength is not about what you can do, Your Highness." His voice was quiet and thoughtful. "It is about what you choose to do." He turned to face her, and she saw something vulnerable behind those tired eyes, something human. "I have killed more people than I can count. I am very, very good at it. But I do not want to be good at it. I want to be good at being a person, at sitting in a cafe and drinking coffee, and having a conversation that is not about threat assessment, at walking through a market without calculating how to kill everyone." "I see." He paused and something like pain crossed his face. "You asked me to guard you. The truth is I was guarding myself too, from becoming only the weapon they made me. 3 days with you protecting someone instead of hunting someone. It reminded me why we fight, not to destroy, to protect." Valith felt tears stinging her eyes, and she did not fully understand why this man had killed over 100 people in a single night. He should terrify her. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sadness for what had been done to him, what had been taken from him. She made a decision in that moment, a decision that would change both their lives. "I am appointing you as my personal diplomatic attaché." She spoke with all the authority of her royal blood. "It is a ceremonial position, mostly attending boring functions and making small talk and drinking at state dinners. No combat required, unless I ask, and I will not ask unless I have no other choice." "Your Highness," Marcus began to protest, but she cut him off. "My name is Valith." She met his eyes and held them. "And I am not offering you a job. Marcus, I am offering you a chance to be that person you want to be among people who will never ask you to be a weapon." Marcus Cole stood frozen. He had been a soldier since he was 18 years old. He had been a revenant since his mid-20s. He had been running and fighting and killing for so long that he had forgotten any other way to exist. And now this alien princess was offering him something he had given up, hoping for a life, a real life. "I suppose I could use a vacation." The words came out rough and uncertain, but Valith heard the hope beneath them. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in days. "Then welcome to the Etherian Empire. Ambassador Cole, 10 years. Past Ambassador Marcus." Cole became a familiar figure in the imperial court. He attended state functions with quiet dignity and mediated disputes with surprising wisdom, and developed a reputation for reading every species he encountered with uncanny accuracy. His hair went gray at the temples, and then silver throughout. The tired look in his eyes softened into something more like peace. He drank his coffee every morning and had conversations that had nothing to do with threat assessment. He walked through markets and gardens and only occasionally calculated killing patterns out of old habit. The stories from Nexus Station faded into legend. Most people dismissed them as exaggeration, because surely no single human could have done what the stories claimed. Some remembered the truth. The Corthan warlord Drethker never spoke of what had happened and flinched whenever he saw a human. Commander Vex spent the rest of his life in a medical facility and never recovered his sanity. And Empress Valis Saranthar knew exactly what her old friend was capable of because she had seen it once more. Just once, an assassination attempt at her coronation 5 years after Nexus Station. The assassin had survived. Barely. He never recovered the use of his limbs. Marcus had apologized afterward. Said he was out of practice. Said he should have been cleaner. Valeth had simply smiled and poured him another cup of coffee. On a quiet evening, 10 years after their first meeting, the Empress found her ambassador sitting on a balcony in the Imperial Palace. He was drinking his coffee and watching the stars. And there was something like contentment on his face. "May I join you?" She sat beside him without waiting for an answer. Marcus smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that still surprised her sometimes. "Always, Your Majesty." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. "Are you happy, Marcus Valeth?" asked the question softly. "After everything that happened, after everything you were, after everything you did." Marcus considered the question carefully. He thought about the blood on his hands that would never wash away. He thought about the nightmares that still came sometimes. He thought about the weapon he had been and the man he was trying to become. "I am learning to be." His voice was quiet but steady. "Every day I am learning, and that is more than I ever thought I would have." Valeth reached over and squeezed his hand. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about humanity in the years since Nexus Station. They were not weak. They were restrained. The difference was more terrifying than any display of force, but there was another lesson hidden beneath the first, one that only a few people understood. The greatest strength was not the ability to destroy. It was the ability to choose not to. And on that quiet evening, a former weapon sat on a balcony and drank his coffee and watched the stars, and finally felt like a person again. They asked if humans were dangerous. They had no idea. But the real question was never about danger. It was about what humans chose to do with all that power, and sometimes they chose peace. Sometimes they chose to protect instead of destroy. Sometimes they chose to become something more than weapons. And that choice made all the difference. Marcus Cole finished his coffee and smiled at the stars, and somewhere in the vastness of space, the galaxy slept a little easier. Not because humanity was weak, but because one human had proven they could be strong enough to be gentle. That was the true measure of strength, and the princess, who had asked a human to guard her, understood that better than anyone. She had seen the devil from Earth become a man. And that was the greatest victory of all.